Our first contestant is 226, and he will be answering the question, how will the Green New Deal influence future environmental legislation? How will the Green New Deal influence future environmental legislation?
Cable news pundits love to pronounce one freshman congresswoman's name, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The problem is they're not always successful. One cable pundit called her Alessandra Oxycontin. And Lou Dobbs, the paradigm of journalistic integrity, called her Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And while we commonly know her as AOC, there are 3 letters also attached to her name, GND, standing for the Green New Deal. An article from The Atlantic tells us on June the 12th of 2019 that AOC proposed the influential Green New Deal last November as a 14-page white paper congressional resolution. This deal attempted to solve the ever-pressing emergency of climate change, as the United States, after withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accords, has no sweeping environmental legislation to protect us in the near future. The Atlantic continues that the deal was met with regret, but also immense popularity across the United States. And now the think tank, New Consensus, is working to transform this resolution into a sweeping policy agenda by the year 2020. We don't have much time to waste. In fact, we see in an article from the Scientific American from January of this year that emissions rose by 3.8%. We face crises around the world, in Sudan and Yemen, but this is a crisis of the natural world. And that's exactly why for everyone in this room, we have to ask today's question. How will the Green New Deal influence future environmental legislation? The answer simply is that it will serve as the bedrock for future environmental legislation. First, by forcing bipartisan action on climate mitigation. Second, and more broadly, by addressing the critical concept of environmental justice. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, by leading to a new global paradigm on climate policy. Republicans for years have said that innovation is the way that we can solve climate change. But what exactly is innovation? If I had a nickel for every time they said innovation, I'd be able to pay for the $93 trillion Green New Deal. This is the first way in which the Green New Deal will influence future environmental legislation. It will force some kind of bipartisan action on climate mitigation. An article from the Washington Post tells us on April the 3rd of 2019 that before innovation, Republicans saw climate change as a figment of political imagination. Going back to 2011, Mitt Romney ran on a campaign that said he didn't even know if humans were a cause of climate change. And in neither his campaign nor the 2016 campaign did Republicans propose any kind of sweeping climate solution. This is very different from the American popular opinion. In fact, the Washington Post continues that Republicans, now 64%, believe that climate change is a severe threat to our future survival. And 45% of all Americans believe that we need immediate action. We see in a further article from Politico on March the 26th of 2019 that the Green New Deal and the poll numbers are finally forcing Republicans to listen. Senator Lamar Alexander of Tennessee, a Republican, proposed his Manhattan Project on clean energy. Matt Gaetz of Florida proposed a Green Real Deal, which would combine carbon capture with less oil drilling. Both of these solutions are certainly influenced by popularity, but they're also because of the Democratic ploy of the Green New Deal to change innovation into forcing Republicans to actually innovate. This is a showing that the Green New Deal is part of a way to guide future climate debate. We're not simply going to just pass this 14-page resolution. We're going to come to bipartisan solutions like a carbon tax, one that allows us to grow our economy while cutting emissions. Secondly, we have to look more broadly to the question of environmental justice. Because while the climate movement is right, they're also very white. In fact, the climate movement looks like a cross between a Comic-Con convention and a Bernie Sanders rally. This is the second way that we can change, that the Green New Deal is influencing future environmental legislation by democratizing it with environmental justice. An article from The Guardian tells us on May the 21st of 2019 that when we think of solar panels and carbon capture, Americans are tangibly being hurt by climate change. 1.6 million Americans live near a trash incinerator, a product of our industrial complex that has led to higher rates of asthma and maternal mortality. In my home state of New Jersey, it's doubled the rate of asthma because of climate motivations on these incinerators. In climate legislation, we've often looked to just alternative energy, but this time, the Green New Deal is proposing a jobs guarantee, universal health care, and better subsidies to allow minorities to get equity. This is great because we're designing a new future where we won't just have a world where we're not swimming all the time, but also where everyone will be on an equal footing. We see in a different article, this time from Vox, on March the 7th of 2019, that in the state of Illinois, this led to an equity environmental justice bill being passed, where there will be 40 million solar panels installed by 2050 that will also have a focus on inviting and hiring marginalized people. In this way, we're considering an impact that isn't just a greener world. We're making sure that those who have been the most marginalized by our pollution are now the most advantaged. And there's nothing more powerful than that. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, at the beginning of this year, climate scientists with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change sat very apathetically at a table much like yours and said, "We're all going to die." Their dead face was a little apathetic, but it represents a global apathy towards sweeping climate change legislation. And it's a final way the Green New Deal will influence this future environmental legislation by leading to a new, unified global paradigm. We see in an article from the Los Angeles Times from December of 2018 that the most sweeping piece of climate legislation we have around the world is the Paris Climate Accords. The problem with it is it proposes a goal, 1.5 degrees Celsius of heating, with no actual mechanism on how to get there. We see in a final article, this time from the New York Times, from March of 2019, that ultimately the Green New Deal has been around before the United States proposed it in 2018. It came from the UK, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's accessibility with it has now made it more of a globally accessible source. The National Interest tells us on June the 4th of 2019 that candidates in Spain, Sweden, Norway, and even Canada have run on a Green New Deal agenda. And the Green New Deal is creating a unified platform where we can all cut reductions. We landed a man on the moon. And if we're not careful about climate change, we're all gonna have to move to the moon. That's exactly why we have to return back to today's question. How will the Green New Deal influence future environmental legislation? The answer is that it will serve as a fundamental bedrock. More specifically, first, by leading to bipartisan action, second, by addressing environmental justice, and finally, by leading to global universality. AOC might have a complicated name, but there are only 3 letters we need to learn about the Green New Deal: Y-E-A. Thank you very much.
And now, contestant 226 will be cross-examined by contestant 207.
First off, congratulations on making it to the stage. This is incredible. You gave a great speech. I just have a couple of questions.
Thank you so much.
Let's start off with this Politico article you referenced, which tells us that 64% of Republicans are now seeing climate change as a major human-caused issue. How can we ensure that they will be behind the Green New Deal, given that not only is it about the environment, but it also goes towards a lot of taxes that Republicans have been historically opposed to?
I'm glad you brought that up, and I actually referenced that towards the end of my first point. The Green New Deal in the context of Republicans is a piece of guiding legislation. They don't want a future where there are no planes, but they are willing to compromise on a carbon tax or increase accessible infrastructure and technology. Republicans and Democrats can combine on that win, but that win is being motivated by the Green New Deal.
But it's not just a carbon tax, is it? The Green New Deal also outlines within it a massive income tax for those earning massive amounts of money. Are they really going to want to compromise something that they hold as an ideal of their party?
Again, I would reiterate that this is a piece of guiding environmental legislation, especially for Republicans. The point is Republicans have to be called on the carpet and propose some kind of policy solution. If there was no Green New Deal, there would be no Green Real Deal that Matt Gaetz has proposed.
Let's look towards your third point of analysis. You discussed the Paris Climate Accords and how, while there was a goal, there wasn't exactly a planned mechanism by which we could achieve this goal.
Yes.
What is the stated goal of the Green New Deal?
The stated goal of the Green New Deal is to decarbonize the United States and more broadly the world by the year 2030, which would avert what scientists say is the most destructive kind of warming, over 2 degrees Celsius, that would lead all of us to learn how to swim.
And through what mechanisms do they state they'd like to achieve these goals?
A number of mechanisms. We have better accessible transport, more electric cars, more solar panels, hydroelectric, nuclear energy, the list goes on and on.
Awesome. Great speech.
Thank you so much.